What's up, guys? Nick from P2W Fantasy here in my office on my work break. Gonna drop a video going over my 2021 my guys. So, guys, I want to put my stamp on for this coming season. So, a lot of content creators come out and talk about tons of players in the off season, do a lot of evaluating, and I think you'll see with some people they talk more frequently about certain players that they really are behind this coming season. For me, some of these my guys, I have them ranked higher than the consensus do, and they're guys that I have a ton of faith in this coming season. Guys I try to grab in most of my fantasy league. So as I go through this my guys list, I've talked about a lot of players, but I really want to put my stamp on these guys and want to reflect back after this coming season on how they did. Did they, come? Did they finish with the expectations that I had for them? What was the process I came with to evaluate these guys and have this much faith in these guys? And then, where have I gone wrong? So it's always nice to project forward and then reflect on it later. But these are some guys I have a ton of confidence in for this coming season. I want to put my name behind these guys. So we'll get that going here in a second. Got a PowerPoint as always, all official and stuff here. But yeah, 2021 my guys. So I have 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a kicker, a defense, and then some honorable mentions for those positions. So let's kick it off with a quarterback. So a guy that I talked about earlier this season that comes to mind, Jalen Hurts. So Jalen Hurts, to me, is a guy who has that 2019 MVP Lamar Jackson season sort of ceiling for him. Jalen Hurts, we saw a glimpse of this past season. He started weeks 14 through 17, so a little bit smaller of a sample size, but what he did was very, very good for fantasy purposes. So the knock he got was the 52% completion rate, but I don't think enough people looked at the reasoning behind that. He actually had a 9.5 average depth of throw, which was a league high, which resulted also in a 13.8 yards per completion, which also paced the NFL. So Hurts came in, obviously ran the ball a lot, but the depth of his throw was obviously long and far. So what does that result in? Sometimes a lower completion percentage versus guys that have a safer depth of their target. So Hurts came in, again, weeks 14 on. In those weeks that he started, so the 4 weeks combined, 14 through 17, was the QB7 during that time. If you look at just the fantasy playoffs, he would have been the QB3. So if you were to grab this guy off of waivers last season, once he actually got the starting job, he would have been very, very good for you for fantasy purposes. Week 14, QB13, week 15, QB1, week 16, QB12. So that's some good weeks for a guy that was probably free in most fantasy leagues for the average fantasy league that was for redrafts. So during those times as well, he had the obviously high rushing ceiling. He carried the ball 18, 11, 9, and 8 times, which resulted in 106, 63, 69, and 34 rushing yards. 8 total touchdowns and 4 starts. So for the rushing quarterbacks, that's a cheat code for fantasy. Rushing yards are worth 0.1 fantasy points, and then the passing yards are worth 0.04. So a guy that can do both is obviously going to be a guy that gets an elevated ceiling for their weekly output. Rushing yards being big for a quarterback in fantasy with a guy who can score some touchdowns is big for Jalen Hurts. So what did this team do in the offseason? They added Devonta Smith, who was the Heisman Trophy winner from Alabama. Great separation, route running, quickness, and hands. He has a good familiarity from college with Jalen Hurts, so those two are back connected. Devonta Smith, obviously you don't win the Heisman as a wide receiver for, any small reason. It's typically a quarterback award, so what he did at Alabama was outstanding. He's coming into the system, hopefully with year 2 Jalen Reagor, who can pick his game up and really complement what Devonta Smith is able to bring. They do have the combination of the tight ends, Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. Also, Kenny Gainwell, who's a running back they brought in, who is a great pass catcher who can line up as well in the slot. So Jalen Hurts, the upside, again, just like that MVP season 2019, Lamar Jackson is there with the rushing ability, the bigger arm plays, and the added pass catchers. I do have a lot of faith in Jalen Hurts, and right now he is being drafted as the quarterback 12. And when I reference ADP for this pod or this YouTube video here, it's all coming from Fantasy Pros. I have him slated, though, as the QB 8. Again, the ceiling is very high, and the production is going to be very good this coming season. Next guy on the list here, I'm not trying to be a homer about it, but I have to go with Justin Fields. And I think Justin Fields, if you are looking for a great QB2 target, Justin Fields is your guy. If you want to take a quarterback in a one-quarterback league somewhere around the mid-rounds and then go late for Justin Fields, I'm all about that there. The 11th overall pick, Chicago Bears picked him up. I think he should have been the number 2 pick to the Jets instead of Zach Wilson, but that's another sort of discussion, another argument. But this guy profiles as having a good arm. He has a big arm with high-end rushing. He ran a 4.540, so that's elite speed for a quarterback. He's a true dual-threat playmaker. We've been seeing it in preseason already, him scrambling out of the pocket, looking downfield first, making some plays either with his legs or when he's drawing attention, and then picking it out with his arms. So what I like about him as well is he had a low turnover rate in college. He played at a great level. He's coming on to a team that has an elite wide receiver in Allen Robinson. So he's going to be Allen Robinson's best quarterback he's ever played with for his NFL career. And I'm just saying that, frankly, just because of the faith I have in Justin Fields. So he may not start right away. He may be behind Andy Dalton, but I don't think that he's going to be sitting for too long. So due to the fact that some people don't want to grab him right away because of not knowing if he's going to start, I think he can slip down draft boards and really be beneficial for you coming off of your bench at some point during the season once he gets going. They also have Darnell Mooney, who's a good deep threat for Justin Fields, who we've seen in college throw the deep ball and do it accurately. Hopefully Cole Kmet gets those minutes like he was at the end of the season. It can be an outlet for him in the middle of the field. David Montgomery being a pass-catching improvement, I think will be good for Fields as well. And, just have a lot of faith in him. And I think him being drafted as QB 17, I think his ceiling, just like we talked about Hurts, is elevated because of the playmaking and dual threat ability with his arm and his legs. So ADP is QB 17. I have him slated as the QB 14 for this coming season once he gets going. And then the honorable mention, I'm going to go with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is being drafted as the QB 31. I have him 10 spots higher personally as the QB 21. It's the best situation he's ever been in. Obviously, with the Jets, the coaching, the offensive line, the wide receiver weapons that he had, and then having to chase so many games because they were usually down in games was not to Sam Darnold's benefit. So if he goes out to the Carolina Panthers and he flops, then that's 100% on him. But I'm hoping that he has some sort of career turnaround like Ryan Tannehill did when he moved from Miami and went to the Tennessee Titans. CMC being an easy outlet for him. DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson were both top 25 guys this last season. Terrace Marshall looks great in preseason and camp. So I think with Sam Darnold, a big arm, and some decent flashes of a quarterback IQ, I think that he can smash that ADP of quarterback 31 that he's being slotted at right now. Really excited to see how he meshes with this team in Matt Rule's second year as a coach for this offense. So running back, if the report came out today about Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, being concerned about him being ready right away. But I still have tons and tons of faith in DAndre Swift. I talked about him so much this offseason that if he was to flop, I think a lot of fingers would be pointed to me, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm not scared of Jamal Williams. Nobody was when Aaron Jones was the starter for the Packers, and Williams was behind him. I'm not comparing Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift. I'm not trying to make it that argument. I think they're both extremely talented, but if Williams didn't scare you for Aaron Jones, he should scare you for Swift. You look at Anthony Lynn, who's the offensive coordinator. His 2019 Chargers were 5-11, and Austin Ekeler that season had 108 targets that year. So the Detroit Lions, being a team that probably is going to be bad this season, I think there's still a high upside in receiving targets for DeAndre Swift. Jared Goff, back in 2017 and 2018, so Todd Gurley is the running back. He distributed 87 and 81 targets. So Jared Goff being on the Lions as well, he's had familiarity in the past of delivering balls to the running back position. I think, again, these are two instances of how they can relate to DeAndre Swift being a premier pass catcher for the Detroit Lions that really don't have an helpful wide receiver. They do have a good tight end, but they don't have a ton of guys that you are confident in to catch the ball. So a good stat I found this offseason, 66.6% or 2/3 of running backs that had 60-plus receptions finished as a top 12 running back. So I think DeAndre Swift is primed to be a guy that can have 60-plus receptions just because he can do it for one, and for two, they're going to need it for the Detroit Lions. So you look at some of the rushing upside here for DeAndre Swift. A lot of people are concerned about game script and things like that, but he still will get enough volume to have a decent rushing season here. Frank Ragnow, Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, and now Penei Sewell actually equals a good O-line. So the Detroit Lions have a nice O-line. A lot of teams do not. So even if they are not able to pound the rock every game, they still have the ability to open up the lanes and rush block for DeAndre Swift. He's a guy that was very efficient in the red zone. 42.1% of his rushing attempts in the red zone resulted in a touchdown. He was a top 18 running back for fantasy, despite 30 running backs having more touches than him this past season. And he had 191.8 fantasy points on 160 total touches. So that came out to 1.19 fantasy points per touch. So I had a stat that laid out the top 20 running backs from this past season and how many fantasy points per touch they had. And there's only a select few that had one or more fantasy point per touch, and DeAndre Swift was one of these guys. So him as a efficient running back, despite minimal touches last season, gives me even more optimism that with a starting role now for this full season, that he's going to be very, very good. I believe in the talent, I believe in the pass catching, I believe in the rushing ability, and I believe in volume. So I think all of those things combined is going to make DeAndre Swift a top 10 running back this season. So I have him as the RB10, despite his ADP being the RB17 right now. Next guy, Austin Ekeler, another huge pass catcher. 5 weeks this past season with 7+ targets. We saw targets such as 11, 16, 9, and 9 with Justin Herbert. A lot of people didn't think Justin Herbert was going to be that Phillip Rivers dump-off guy, but him and Austin Ekeler were very connected this past season, despite him missing 6 weeks. PFF had a cool stat I saw that looked at the yards after catch leader since 2019. Austin Ekeler was the leader in yards after catch since 2019, with Alvin Kamara being second. Weeks 12 through 17 after he came back from an injury, or his injuries, Austin Ekeler was the RB6. So post-injury, he was very good for fantasy. They added to this O-line this offseason. They had Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, who a lot of people said was the second best lineman in this class. They added to that O-line that was kind of sketchy before. Looking at Austin Ekeler as a rusher, a lot of people always just focus on the pass catching. He has a 4.7 yards per carry career average, so that is not bad at all. A lot of people think that he cannot rush the ball, but if you look at a lot of other running backs, he actually has a better yards per carry in comparison to some other guys. You look at Joe Mixon, for example, he has a better yards per carry compared to him, even though the sample size for the actual rushing attempts have a big gap between them. So ESPN actually projects him to have 188 carries, which would be a career high. The other guys in the system, Joshua Kelly, Justin Jackson, Larry Roundtree, those are not guys I can foresee having a ton of an impact on Austin Ekeler's fantasy value. So if you look at heavy volume just in general, plus passing efficiency, which we've seen from Austin Ekeler, I think his ceiling is very, very high. So his ADP right now is the running back 10. I personally have him as the running back 7. I think he's going to get a ton of receptions. I think he'll be one of the league leaders for running back receptions. I think he's got a shot to actually lead all running backs this year. And then I think he's going to carry the ball more than he ever has. So I have a ton of faith in Austin Ekeler this coming season. Honorable mention, Najee Harris. We saw rookies in the past like Zeke, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor all finished top 10 for the running back position. I think Najee Harris is another guy that has that opportunity to do so. I have him as my running back 9 for this coming season. I think that if you look at what he brings, he's a grown man. He's 6'2", 230, solid receiver. He's elusive for his size. That size plus strength combination is going to be great for the NFL. I think that if you look at guys like last year, James Robinson, for example, huge volume resulted in great fantasy numbers. So I think Najee Harris is going to be a guy that does everything. He's going to run the ball. He's going to rush the ball. He's going to score some touchdowns. So what that equals for me is a clear running back stud for this coming season. So Najee Harris, I know a lot of people say, be careful with the rookies and you don't want to have rookie fever. But this guy, in my opinion, is top 10, and he's going to get a ton of work on a team that really wanted to add a rusher to the team. They struggled to run the ball last year, Pittsburgh, and I think that they want to establish a run this year to go along with a good passing offense. So next on the list, we'll go to wide receivers here. We got Robert Woods. So Robert Woods has consistently been a top 14 guy the last 3 years. McVay loves him. So I know some things change in systems, but head coach Sean McVay loves this guy. They extended him. They use him creatively. He actually has had 60 carries the last 3 seasons. So that doesn't massively elevate his fantasy ceiling or anything like that. But when you see an offense line a guy up in different areas of the field, extend a contract, have him rush the ball, give him tons and tons of targets, I think that just makes you optimistic for what's to come this coming year, especially since they have a quarterback upgrade in Matthew Stafford. He had 129 targets last year. I can see in 2021 that being 130 to 140 targets. So I think that they'll have a slight bump in the targets with a quarterback upgrade. Hopefully that means more touchdowns. And when he finished as a top 15 guy this past season, I think he was wide receiver 13. He finished there. If he has a big bump in some things that can make him even more fantasy relevant, I think we should all be a little bit more excited than we actually are for Robert Woods. The ADP is wide receiver 14. I have him as wide receiver 13, so not a big gap there, but a lot of people still, I think, are not as high on him just because he's not as sexy of a name. Doesn't bring, as massive of an upside as some other guys who can score big-time touchdowns do, and some people still have him as the second best wide receiver on his team, but I'm against all that because I have a lot of faith in Robert Woods. He's been very reliable for fantasy. He's been a target hog. He's always underrated, though, so I'm always on the Robert Woods train, and I still am in 2021, especially if there is the opportunity for him to progress in several areas of the field. So another guy that I will talk about, and I've been talking about, and I have a lot of faith in still, Deontay Johnson. So ADP is wide receiver 21. I have him as the wide receiver 15. He was 7th in targets for wide receivers with 144, despite the frustration of him leaving 3 games injured. So he definitely could have had even more targets than he had this past season, and he was 7th for wide receivers in targets. Drops were a concern and talked about often, even voiced by head coach Mike Tomlin, but we saw 27 targets in weeks 15 and 16, so they weren't really taking away too much for him, despite all these talks about drops down the stretch. He's going into his third year. He's still progressing. He had a great sophomore season. He had 10 games of 10-plus targets. Weeks 9 through 13, he had 5 straight games of 10-plus targets. So the volume was real. And I think the fact that Big Ben is back doesn't really change anything for the pass catchers. You add Najee Harris to the team, who is going to catch the ball, and their rookie Freiermuth is going to have an impact at some point. I don't know if it's going to be right away with their Ebron, but I don't see a ton changing for the connection of Big Ben to Deontay Johnson. When people say, who's the wide receiver one on this team between him, Chase Claypool, and Juju Smith-Schuster, I think it's clear. Just look at the target volume. I have a lot of faith that Deontay Johnson this coming season is going to have somewhere around the same target share, still be a guy that can be top 10, top 12 in target volume. So with that being said, and the quarterback being the same, Deontay Johnson is a guy for me that's top 15 this coming season. He had 6 games over 21 fantasy points this past season. So that was very, very useful and very beneficial for your fantasy lineups. And he's a guy I'm comfortable slating as my wide receiver 2 on my team. Jerry Jeudy. So Jerry Jeudy was my wide receiver 1 out of this past draft class in 2020. He was 21st in wide receiver targets as a rookie with 113. He was used more vertically than maybe more than expected. He had a 4.5 ADOT, so average depth of target, which was 8th amongst wide receivers. 25% of the balls thrown his way, though, were off target. So people look at the drops and people look at the overall fantasy finish, but when so many balls were thrown off target, when he had Drew Lock, who was a poor passer this last season, he had a few other guys throwing him the ball at times. I think that you have to look at those things when you look at the overall picture at the end of a season. So we saw some decent flashes of him as a rookie, though. Week 9, 7 catches for 125 receiving yards, a touchdown, and 25.5 fantasy points. Week 17, 5 catches for 140 receiving yards, and touchdown, and 27 fantasy points. He is elite route running. I think everybody that has mentioned that at some point, just looking at him as a prospect and looking at him as an NFL player. He makes plays with the ball in his hand as well. I think this coming season it's going to be one of two things for the quarterback position. Either Drew Lock is going to be a more efficient passer and improve his game, or Teddy Bridgewater, who's now on the team, will take over the job. So in either one of those two circumstances, I think Jerry Jeudy will have an improved fantasy season. I think if efficiency is better overall in this passing offense, that will be huge for him, because I know a lot of people like Cortland Sutton, but to me, Jerry Jeudy is the wide receiver 1 on this team, despite how people kind of view where those targets are going to go. I don't think it really matters to me. I think the quarterback play is going to be different, Drew Lock to Teddy Bridgewater, but at the same time, for me, either or, Jerry Jeudy for me is wide receiver 1. Looking at this coming season, you can probably project somewhere between 128 to 135 targets, over 1,000 receiving yards, and hopefully a big bump in the touchdown category. Jerry Jeudy's a guy that I personally have. I got to pull up the actual standings here for my rankings, but I have Jerry Jeudy higher than consensus. I have him as the wide receiver 23 right now, which would be huge for fantasy. So what I am expecting is him to have that sophomore jump in his production for fantasy purposes, and I still have tons of faith in Jerry Jeudy, even despite having slightly a disappointing rookie season when we're looking specifically at fantasy in general. Honorable mention, been talking about Elijah Moore all offseason, 34th overall pick in this past rookie draft class 2021. He plays in the slot, and I know Jamison Crowder is back, but you've seen him line up vertically both at Ole Miss and at Jets camp. A lot of highlights that came out with him getting linked up with Zach Wilson, with him doing some out routes, him going vertically deep down the field as well. I think the volume potential is high. I think he has the potential to have a ton of targets in year one. Corey Davis looks good right now, but I think Elijah Moore, from a talent perspective and the versatility he brings for the wide receiver position, I have a lot of faith in him, his connection to Zach Wilson, and what he can do year one for fantasy purposes. So I think he's a true sleeper for redraft because I think he's going to go very late in drafts unless somebody's really high on him like me. But I think that he has the potential to really smash his ADP and be very useful for fantasy. So Elijah Moore is a guy I'm sticking with. Hopefully it's year one. If it's not year one, we'll have to see what the reason behind it is and see if there's going to be improvements for year two. But for me, Elijah Moore in year one is going to be fantasy relevant. So tight end position, my honorable mention is a guy that everybody is talking about. So I wanted to shy away from that. I want to talk about Logan Thomas as a guy who I've recently grown more fond of this offseason because I think a lot of people were overly concerned about the additions of Curtis Samuel and De'Ami Brown to the team and what that would do to Logan Thomas. But I think we have to look at what he did last year and how he's still progressing as a 29-year-old tight end. He finished 2020 as the tight end 3, which is a major shock if we looked at what we predicted versus how things actually played out. He had the most snaps and he had the most routes for the tight end position. He played with Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith primarily. He himself is another guy who was a big QB upgrade in Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fitzmagic this coming season, in comparison to what he had before. He had 18 targets in the red zone, which was tied for 4th for tight ends. He had 7 games of 7+ targets. He had 4 games of 9+ targets. So the volume was good for Logan Thomas this last season. So the target share can be impacted, but I think that there's still going to be enough volume for him to be very relevant for fantasy. I think that the targets and the snap percentages and the routes run will be pretty consistent throughout the year. He's still learning, he's still developing, he's still progressing as a 29-year-old tight end. This was a guy who once was a quarterback. His ADP right now is tight end 8. I also have him as tight end 8, but I think that if you don't go for an elite tight end, this would be my target for a guy that can be very useful on a weekly basis for you for fantasy. And then everybody, their mother, their grandma, their sister, their brother, their cousin, their neighbor, everybody knows Kyle Pitts, and I love Kyle Pitts. I'm one of those guys. I have a jersey hanging in my studio. Number 4 off the board this last draft season, going to the Atlanta Falcons that just had Julio Jones depart from the team. The guy ran a 4.440 at 6'6", which is scary. He's super freakishly athletic. I can see him having over 100 targets his rookie season as a tight end, which is not typical at all. His ADP and where I have him is tight end 4. But what this guy is going to do to fantasy, he's going to break the tight end stigma of tight ends need 2 to 3 years to develop. This guy's going to come out and ball year 1. So you have to be excited for Kyle Pitts. I know everybody is, but at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from a take on a guy just because everybody seems to be pretty high. I think he's going to be great for fantasy. I think he's going to be great right away for fantasy. So I'm not going to go deep into this, but if you are drafting a kicker, a guy I like is Tyler Bass. He is the kicker for the Buffalo Bills. He was a rookie this past season. He was the 4th best kicker for fantasy this past season. So I think he's going to be very busy for the Buffalo Bills as they are going to be in good field positions often. They're going to be a great offense. So with the amount of times he's going to be lining up to kick the ball, whether it's extra points or just getting that 3 points because they were stopped short, I think Tyler Bass for the Buffalo Bills is a great pick. A lot of people are always focused on, the hot names for the kicker position. When you actually draft it, Justin Tucker is usually that guy. Young Ho Koo is usually the talk of a lot of people for the Atlanta Falcons. But I like Tyler Bass. And then defensively, so if you are streaming or not streaming, if you're drafting at the end of your drafts, a defense, if you're in a league that does that, I like Washington. They had 4 first former NFL draft picks in Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Darren Payne. Landon Collins is coming back from an injury. Cameron Curl is a guy that was great to fill in for Landon Collins last year, so it'll be interesting to see how those two mesh in both around the secondary together. They added first-round linebacker Jamin Davis from Kentucky, who a lot of people are excited about. Washington was great for defense last year. They were good for a fantasy scoring defense and special teams. So I really like the fact that they have a lot of current and former studs all mixed together on a team, and they continue to be better and better. So Washington is a team I would target for a defense. I'm not going to reach for them, but if nobody's drafting one and I'm looking to see who I really want to get after, some teams might, go and try to grab the Steelers, like the 49ers or the Ravens or Rams. I don't know. I'm going for Washington. So recap over my guys. Again, these are guys that I want to put my stamp on for this coming season. Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, DeAndre Swift, Austin Ekeler, Robert Woods, Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, Logan Thomas, and then we mentioned some honorable mention guys as well. Tons of guys I've talked about all off season, but these are my guys. And I have some more that I didn't really dive deep into or throw on this list, but I wanted to keep it kind of short and concise here. So these are guys I have faith in this coming season. I'm high on. I try to roster everywhere, and hopefully I convinced you a little bit on some of them as well. But feel free to hit me up for questions on any of these guys if you are juggling one of them or another person in a fantasy draft or a trade. So thanks for checking this one out, and more content to come soon.